So fans of the canal tend to get kind of geeky over these westward facing locks, the ones that step down to the west, for just a very simple reason that they just presented a lot more issues to the boatmen as they tried to pass through here. And I'm going to try to explain it. I wish I had a bathtub full of water to try to explain this for you, but I'll try to do it verbally here. Of the 67 locks that step down to the east, meaning that the lower end was on the eastern side, the boats were coming from Buffalo fully loaded. They were drafting 6.5 feet. And as they entered the locks, they were entering the locks when the locks were at their fullness. So basically they would fill up the locks until the water got to the top of the gates on the low end, and then you would just allow the water to splash over the top of the lock gate. That was your regulating device. There's no other regulating device in here. If you overfilled the chamber, the water just spilled over the top of the lock gate. You didn't want to do that. That was wasting water, but that was something that was done. You had to reach a depth for the boats. So a fully loaded boat would be coming into the lock, and as it enters the lock here, it's filling the lock completely. I mean, the lock chamber is 18 feet wide, and the boat is 17.5 feet wide, and it's filling up this lock chamber completely. Boats displaced the same amount of water as they weigh, so 200 tons of water as it's entering the lock chamber here. That water has to go somewhere. Well, when the boats are riding high, when they're at the top end of the lock, the water can either scoot back underneath the boat to the rear of the boat, you know, sort of squeezing out in that space under the boat and the side of the boat, or the wedge of water is just pushed forward until it spills over the top of the lock gate. So as the boat enters into the chamber, it's just pushing that big wedge of water in front of it, and the water that can't squeak out underneath the boat just spills over the top of the lock gate at the lower end. And so that wasn't too much of a difficulty for the mules. Also, the boat would be riding high, and the mules are over on the towpath. Mules are way over there, so that rope is stretching out across the lock island over here, trying to pull this boat. And especially when the lock chambers were lengthened, it just created twice the amount of issue because the lengthened chambers on the berm side. So the ropes have to go all the way from there. They have to go around the lock island, over that deck, around the office, all that stuff. So it's just another bother for them. Well, with these 5 locks that step down to the west, the boat's entering in here, and as it forms that plug, the water can't go over the top of the lock gate. It's all the way, it's the lowest amount. So the lock gate in front now traps that water in. So in a sense, we're creating like a hydraulic ram. That boat is trying to be pulled in here by the mules, by the men. It's forming a plug. That big slug of water is in front of the boat, pushing back against it. And it's just, you know, these hydraulic forces are just pushing back against the boat. The mule is trying to pull the boat forward. The water is squeezing out underneath the boat, around the sides of the boat, very, very slowly. And it could take hours, they said, for a boat, especially if the boat was fully loaded or the water was lower than normal. It could take hours for the mules and the men to drag these boats into the lock. So that's why they're a little bit extra special when we think about the lengthened locks, or the enlarged locks. Also, the lock at 52 is twice as deep as this one. So now you have the boat over here pulling, or the mules pulling the boat in, and you got these ropes that have to come down over and then go down 11 feet to reach the boat. So now you got the mule pulling on the rope, which is rubbing on the rock, and you can see the cuts in the stone here where these ropes just scoured out grooves in the stonework as the mules fought against the boat and fought against the water in the lock. So let's go take a look at the innovation they came up with to overcome this. even though barge canal locks are basically the same construction, I mean it's a concrete box with a gate at each end. What they did for the barge canals, they got tunnels that run alongside the chambers in the wall, built right into the wall. And there's little portals that come out into the lock chamber, so as the boat enters into the chamber and it's displacing that water, the water can then go sideways and then spill out underneath the lock to the lower end. So they compensated for it in the barge canal locks, but these locks here didn't have those tunnels. So like I said, the water either had to go out underneath the boat or out over the top of the lock. So the innovation they came up with, as we get back to these openings here, we have water flowing through these openings, and as the water flows through the opening, they were able to take and put a little water wheel or turbine in the bottom of one of those openings, constructed a little flume to direct the water to the turbine. The water spun the turbine. There was shafts that came up, and the shafts would turn gearing, which would turn capstans, and the capstans would then have ropes attached to them. And here's one of the mounts for the capstans right here. You can see it. Lock 52 doesn't have these cutouts like this. I don't know why this one has it. There's one there and there's one down there at that lock gate, or the middle of the lock. But what the ropes would do is they could just take these lines, run them right down, attach them to the boat, and then use that mechanical force instead of the mule force to pull the boat in. And even though the water still had to squirt out underneath the boat, it was just mechanical force against the hydraulic force instead of animal power against the hydraulic force. And it just took the lockage time from hours to minutes. And they were really happy with this. Lock 52 was one of the first ones to have that innovation. And then they soon put on all these difficult locks, the 5 locks that face down to the west. Eventually all the lengthened, or all the Erie Canal locks got them. They could also use those cable systems to pull the boat out of the lock too. You would just hook it to the far end of the boat and just turn on that mechanism, and the boat could just be pulled right out of the lock and then reattached to the mules, who would then take them away. There's only one of those turbines left out of all 72 locks. There's one turbine left. It was down in the Fly Creek cider mill down south of Cooperstown. It was down in the ground. It's about a 2-foot turbine, and they I don't know if it's still there or not. I went down years ago to look, see it, and all you could see was a shaft coming out of the ground. It wasn't very exciting, but I made the attempt. So that's your quick overview of a enlarged Erie Canal lock. There's a lot of them left, especially in the central western New York part of the state along Route 31. So if you're traveling along 51, 52, 53 is still there, 54, a couple in Newark, 56, 57. I mean, there's a lot of them left. And even though they're all pretty much the same, they're all worth a visit, because you just look for these little differences. Hope you learned something new, gained an appreciation for our Erie Canal locks.